We're also joined by Dr. Yahya Al-Aridi, who is a Syrian politician. He's joining us from Strasbourg. He's part of the Syrian Negotiations Commission, and he's joining us on the line. Thank you both for joining us. Dr. Al-Aridi, I'll start with you, if I may. What did you make of Trump's assertion vis-a-vis ISIS and the complete liberation of territories, as he said, by the quote-unquote caliphate?
Well, when the Syrian people rose against a brutal regime, they thought that they were against a civilized or somebody who believes in human rights or anything of the sort. Unfortunately, not only the regime that they rose against, but the fabricated powers that were there by the regime itself, in particular terrorism, proved to be so brutal beyond the regime's power. Now, when the statement comes from the United States that the American forces would be withdrawn from the northeastern part of Syria because Daesh or ISIS is gone or finished, this is really a blessing for Syrians in general, because terrorism was used by the regime that I was talking about as a pretext in order to suppress, in order to kill the people. Now, with this announcement, there would be no excuse for the regime to say that there is still terrorism. Actually, from the very beginning, we know that not only the regime but other powers contributed to the creation of Daesh and its likes in order to create certain entities, certain powers that would justify for the regime to kill its own people. So its departure is really something very important, very good, although we keep in mind that former American President Obama said that it's going to take 15 years in order to defeat Daesh.
Right.
We didn't know why he said so, but now we can do some sort of interpretation of why he was saying so, because probably he wanted to give justification for the Iranians, Iranian militias, for the regime, to continue with their strategy against Syrian people, civilians, and use all sorts of atrocities under the pretext that there is terrorism, there's Daesh, and its likes.
Dr. Al-Aridi, I wonder of that, because many people would argue that Donald Trump is being a tad bit naive when it comes to understanding a group like ISIS. It's not just about territory, is it? It's about their ability to still carry out attacks and to still threaten Iraqi and Syrian civilians, but of course even beyond this region, towards Europe and even beyond that. Well,
now your guest's interpretation of this move by President Trump is justified in the sense of internal politics, internal United States politics. Because anybody who defeats Daesh, anybody who says that he defeats Daesh would be inaugurated a hero. This would play into the hands of Mr. Trump, definitely. However, when we investigate the Daesh phenomenon, if we can say so, we would realize that we have there a gun for rent. That's one.
Okay.
Second, it is an ideology rather than just some practice being carried out somewhere on a certain geography, etc., etc. And at the same time, it is used at the highest levels of dictatorship. Now, the best way for dictators to justify or to find an excuse for what they do, the brutality they carry out, is to hire somebody like Daesh and to have set like Daesh to justify or to just make what they do, make their brutality less severe, if we can say so. Now, what matters for Syrians who have been suffering for the past 8 years almost is a different story. Actually, those people devastated the country. Of course, not as much as the regime itself, because they didn't have jets, they didn't have rockets, and they didn't demolish buildings as the regime did, and displaced people, tried to change the demography, imprisoned 500,000 people in jails, tortured people in jails. They didn't do that, but they were not less brutal. And one important thing is that the world, due to the fact that the Syrian case has become somehow international, the world paid too much attention to ICE and diverted its attention from the brutality of the regime. And this really has negatively affected the Syrian case, and it links.
But if I may just push you on a point you just made there, Dr. Al-Aridi, because you said that the world concentrated too much on ISIS's brutalities, but then that's logical, is it not, considering then ISIS started carrying out attacks across the world, really?
Well, you know, now every terrorist act in the world now is registered under the trademark Daesh. This is what we understand. This world is full of terrorist acts at different levels. Now, with this concentration on Daesh and everything is being under its name, you would ignore, or you would this would divert the attention from the other organizations, other acts of terrorism being carried out. Now, what concerns us is our Daesh, the brand we have in our part of the world. If you go back to the roots of how it developed, for instance, in Syria, you would know, and this can be investigated and can be looked up it's documented that the regime released hundreds of prisoners who have been there for years because of crimes related to extremism at ideological level. It knew very well that those people would be the future of Daesh in Syria. And many of their emirs were in Sidnaya jail in Syria, released by the regime, and now they are the Daesh of Syria. They are the leaders of Daesh of Syria. And this is really, again, this has harmed the Syrian people, had harmed their case, had diverted the world attention from the suffering they have been going through at the hands of the regime. And the moment Daesh disappears from Syria, it is a pleasing point for Syrians, because that excuse, that pretext will be removed.
Dr. Yahya Al-Aridi, Syrian politician, speaking to us from Strasbourg. He's part of the Syrian Negotiations Commission.